do, so that everyone can hear your questions, Mr. McPhail has set up 2 microphones, and you can come 1 or 2 at a time after he gives his talk, and ask a question so that everyone will be able to hear. So let's do this in a very orderly fashion, and then everyone can benefit from the question and the answer. Now let's give Mr. Sabo a very warm Terry Sanford welcome.
Before I begin this introduction, I'd like to thank Mrs. Johnson and Mr. and Mrs. Flowers for doing all of this work to put this program together for us today. I was born in Malachita, Czechoslovakia on August 7, 1923. I was the oldest of 4 brothers. We lived on a small farm in a constant struggle for survival. Every morning I milked the cows, shoveled the horses' stalls, and ran errands for my parents. Every day our family woke up wondering if there would be food on the table. My father had a saying though: if you have 2 horses with at least 1 good eye between them, you are above poverty. If you had to pull your own cart, you were poor. So I guess in that sense we were never really poor. We had very little, but at least we had each other. Until that night. That was the night that my grandfather, with whom I had been staying, told me that the Nazis had taken my family away. In 1943, they came for me and sent me to a German labor camp where my job was shoveling dead bodies. I was lucky to survive the harsh and unbearable conditions of starvation and torture, but I did survive. After the war, I found my family was not so lucky. They had been transported to Auschwitz, the most horrendous of all Nazi concentration or death camps. The only survivor was my youngest brother, Aaron. Together, determined to make new lives for ourselves, we embarked on our journey halfway across the world to the land of the free and the home of the brave, America. Now, living in America was not easy nor simple. Unable to speak the language nor understand the culture, I failed at jobs again and again. I remember once my boss tried to pay me with a little piece of paper. I made such a fuss that he paid me in cash and told me never to come back again. I later found out that that piece of paper was a check. Another job was in the shipping department of the factory. My job was to stamp the packages. So naturally, I thought that the more stamps I put on the packages, the faster it would get to its destination. Needless to say, that job didn't last very long either. But one day I saw a sign on a building that said, "Uncle Sam wants you." I entered the building and asked to speak with Uncle Sam. When I left that building, I was in the United States Army. Many jobs later, and after marrying my wife Shirley, I went into business for myself. We had 2 daughters, and I knew I had to succeed at something for their sakes. I established and owned 3 garment factories and employed several hundred workers before retiring several years ago. They called me a Horatio Alger, but I think I'm just an ordinary man who overcame some extraordinary obstacles. I still remember my early years and miss my parents and brothers very much. My very difficult childhood encouraged me to overcome any obstacles that stood in my way. The person that I've just described for you is my grandfather. He proved that even the most terrible circumstances and extreme poverty can be overcome. He had unbelievable determination and always believed that he could succeed. I admire and love my grandfather, and am proud to have the privilege to introduce him to you right now. Bernard Sick.
Ladies and gentlemen, teachers and students, thank you for inviting me to speak to you. Well, after the introduction my grandson gave you, I'm going to go right on telling you all about the camp I was in. I was freed in a camp near Austria. If you guys are familiar with the maps Shupron. It's between Austria and Hungary. I was freed by the Soviet forces. Those days, the Soviet Union was still out. I was freed in 1945 in March. I was taken from home in 1943 around October, and I worked in different camps. The last camp was the worst. I was in Budapest, and we were rounded up around October, and we were transported in a cattle train to Shupron. Shupron was a little town also between Austro-Hungarian border. And we worked in the Waldschule. That means we were cutting down trees. We were cutting down trees from sunup to sundown. Luckily, the days were short because it was winter time, so we were cooped up overnight. Every morning we got up, we only hoped for one thing, to come back alive that day. We lived on about 600 calories a day. People were dying. There was about, roughly, the way I heard it, they took us out about $2,500. There's only maybe about 200 or 250 of us alive today out of that camp. That was a labor camp. That was not the concentration camp. That was my most horrible time of survival. Now let me explain something about survival in camps. You were given a piece of bread, a third of a loaf of bread. It had to last you 3 days. If you were disciplined, you ate a little bit every day. Your bread was, you kept the bread in your shirt, tucked away so that you and the lice were just nibbling on it. If you didn't have discipline, if you ate it up the first day, you didn't last you didn't last long because you were hungry. Now, you were getting soup twice a day. In the morning, you got a little bit of black coffee or potato peel soup. I hate potato peels till this day. I like my potatoes peeled. Anyhow, so when you lined up to get the soup, if you were first, you got just stuff. So you kind of figured to get in between. So, the guy get in with a ladle and put a little more potato peels in. So you have a little more nourishment. To survive, I was in that camp 6 months. Not too many of us, like I say, survived. That was my worst nightmare. I think, we just wanted to live. Living was the main thing. One morning, towards the end, around March, we didn't even know it was March, but anyhow, the snow was thawing, the war was coming to an end. They had the death march. We always got up in the morning on sunbreak, when it was light out. This morning, they called appeal, means fall out in the morning. They called us early in the morning while it still was dark. Everybody fell out, but they always called a sick call. And anybody reported on sick call, they marched them over near the latrine, and they shot them and killed them. But we were already on the last leg, so there was a friend of mine next to me, and I looked at his shoes, and I says, you better fall out. He says, listen, I'm going on the death march. I says, well, what's the difference if I go on the death march? I'm going to fall out. And there were just a few elderly people who fell out. And I took a chance and fall out, and I'm alive. Instead of taking us to the latrine and shot us, they took us back to a sort of like a shelter, like a brick factory, and they put us in there, and they left us for 2-3 days. So I fell out. My friend went on the death march. I came home, and I tried to inquire about my friend, and he got killed in the march, and I survived. The Soviet came in, and when they came in, that place where they put us up was full of, people were starving. The soldier come on the knees, picked up a piece of bread, black bread, and a knife, and gave me a bag, side bag, and cut the bread for me, put the bread in there, and told me to get out of here. And I kind of stood up and got out. Till this day, I mean, it's miraculous how I survived. And I'm here 50 years later in front of you speaking about it. So, I mean, I feel privileged that I am alive, really. Then I came home. On the way home, I caught a train. We came into Budapest. The train, I guess they didn't have enough gas or whatever. So the train uphill, everybody had to dislodge. We pushed the train up the hill, down the hill, we jumped on the train down. We stopped on the way to Budapest. Now maybe it's about 3-4 hours, but those days it was about 24 hours. We stopped in little villages, and we got some to eat. I came into Budapest, we got the lights, I went home, and nobody came home from the camps. My family was reported in 1944, about this time of the year, around June. As late as 1944, but they went straight to Auschwitz. Now my brothers were in the selection process. They were selected to labor. My mother grabbed her nephew, or one of the children, and any woman who had a child, they went to the gas chambers immediately. The old and the sick, they died on the way anyhow. The able-bodied, they picked them for labor. Some of them, they picked in the Zoberkommando. If you ever heard the people who worked in the gas chambers, they were rotated every so often, and they were put in. My father was one of them, lucky ones, not so lucky. He was picked for the Zoberkommando. I learned all that after my brother survived. Now, my brother was freed by the American Army. And about a month later, I would say around May, or early May, no, before May, around April, he came home, 1945, and he was the youngest. I met him in Munkaj, not too far away where I was. He came home, he was sick, he went in the hospital. They don't let me see him for a week or so. And he told me the whole story. Don't wait for nobody, because nobody survived. So I think me as the older brother, I felt like being his father. So I tried to talk it over with him and say, look, let's stay home, and things. He says, you can stay home, I'm going. Where are you going? Let's go to the American side. Well, I said, where are we going to go? So we came into Hungary. From Hungary, we came into Austria. From Austria, we came into Italy. And we stayed in DP camp, displaced person camp. DP stands for displaced person. We stayed in displaced person camp for about 3 years, from 45 to 48. So my brother was 18 years old but he wasn't quite 18, so he came in on the Jugend quota. That means they had a quota for younger, under 18s. They let him into the United States, so he came here a month before I did. My number came up about a month later. We came to the United States in 1948. I came in 1948 in March. He came here in 1948 in April. And we've been here ever since. And we made our way here. Now, he already filled you in on some of the stories. My grandson here, how I couldn't hold a job. Emotionally, I don't know what it was. I couldn't hold a job. I wound up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Then I wound up in the Army in Fort Riley, Kansas. I took my basic training. Then I was transferred to Camp Lee, Virginia. Then I used to, I was a young man. I went out and I met my wife. We got married. I put in for independence and discharge. That job, I didn't get fired from. I had to figure out a way of getting out of it. So I got married and I put in for independence and discharge, and I got out because I didn't have enough education to make any higher ranks. And I mean, I just figured, if I live through what I did live through, I want to get, make something out of myself. So I got out of the Army, and then the rest is history. I got in, I was on jobs. I did hold one job for 5 years in Michigan. Then I came down south. I opened up a business in the 1960s, sold out in 78. They put me in the Who is Who, and they made a big deal out of me. I don't know. Anyhow, I figured I'm an ordinary man. I mean, I couldn't believe it, Anyhow, I had about 500 employees. I sold out. I had 3 plants. I sold out. I raised my children. They all went to college. I didn't. Well, I visited them. So I figured, by visiting, I'm going to college too. Anyhow, I figured this is the story of my life in a brief way. Now I'm open to questions and answers. Any questions?
All right, those of you who have questions, if you would just come up and line up down by the microphone so that he can hear you as well as the audience. So I'm sure we have several.
What business did you open when you got to America?
Well, I went into the clothing business because that's the only thing I knew. And I held jobs in the clothing business. I made children's dresses when I sold out. I had plans making children's dresses when I sold out.
Since 1948, did you ever go back to Europe?
Never did.
Never
Except my wife did for a visit.
What'd she say?
She went, well, I don't think she went as far as where I come from, Eastern Europe. She went to Italy, France, England. But I never went there.
I just wanted to ask, like, when you were in these camps, I mean, what got you through that? I mean, didn't you ever feel like giving up, just not wanting to live anymore? What got you through that every day?
The will of survival and really to want to live is very, very strong. And I was the oldest, and I wanted to survive because I always figured that maybe my family is alive too. So So I want to see him. Also, I wanted to survive to tell the world of the cruelty from man to man. I mean, you know, how cruel people can be. The will of survival is tremendous. And I think that's the reason I survive.
What about like other people? Were you scared to get close to other people for fear that they might die too, and just like losing all your friends?
Oh, yeah. Well, you never, when you have friends, when we say friends, you usually in the camps never try to get close to one another to be too friendly. You know, in other words, you know, you were friends, but you were not friends enough to give up your shoe or give up your soup or your bread. You follow me? In other words, in self-preservation, you were the number one to survive. You have to survive. Give you an idea. If you smoked and you were in camp, you didn't survive. That's it. Why? Because if you sold your bread for cigarettes, so how did people come, in camp? How did you get cigarettes? There's no way of getting cigarettes. But you had the guards were smoking, and they threw away butts. And if you were lucky, you picked up the butts. You took them butts, and you kept, you accumulated. Then you sold them for somebody for bread. And as you sold them for bread, if the guy had a pair of good boots on, you had a double whammy. You sold it to him, you got his bread, and you were trying to be in back of him. And if he died, you got the boots too. Then you could sell the boots for another piece of bread to survive. You see, you had to be resourceful of survival. Survival was not as simple as all that. In other words, somebody had to survive, and I happen to be one of them.
Thanks. When you were in the labor camps, what did you see in the faces of the guards?
The faces in the guards, the only thing they knew is how to kill. That was their job. But it was very easy. You see, they say, how come you only had 2, 3 guards and you had all them people out there and they didn't rebel? When you're hungry, mister, you don't have no energy to rebel. So it was easy to guard. And the guards, if they killed you, they didn't take it to court. So they didn't have a hard time guarding. They guarded you with dogs and all that.
What was that potato peel soup? Was it just like pills and water?
Potato peel soup. I hate to make it again. It was, they peeled the potatoes. The potatoes, I guess, the guards ate them. And they just took the peels and they made soup out of it. Tasteless, but it tasted good. Listen, and the more peels you got, the better, because that gave you some kind of energy to stay alive. It's a tough proposition. One more thing I want to touch up on. Why is it important to really, for me here, to talk about the 6 million Jews? Don't forget, there was 11 million died in concentration camps. That was 6 million of them were Jews, 5 million of them prisoners of, political prisoners, that was their thing. Now, the political prisoners, they got 1,100 calories a day. The Jews got 600. Now, the difference between the survival of the Jews were brought in, their wives, their children, their older people, They all were brought in. They wanted a race. They called us a race to eradicate all the Jews in Europe. That was Hitler's mindset. He wanted to make a master race, blonde and blue eyes. That was his ultimate. He wasn't blonde and blue eyes, but he wanted to make everybody else into blonde and blue eyes. So you see, also, don't forget, the war took 56 to 58 million people died. That's a lot of people. The state of North Carolina is 6 million people. So when we say 6 million, it's easy to say it, but it's a lot of people. So the point what I'm trying to bring out is that the Jews were a separate thing. It was altogether, the Holocaust was something brought on, I don't know, I guess, you know, he needed a scapegoat. And the Jews were a minority in all the countries. The biggest Jewish population was in Europe, in Poland. Poland had 9 to 10% Jews. Germany didn't have that many Jews. They only had about, the percentage was about very low. So as Hitler came in and got, don't forget another thing too. If you were a German Jew, you were melted in, you were a German. You were a Hungarian Jew, the only difference was you were in you had different religion. So what happened is, everything was done in a precision way. They came into a town, the Einsatzgruppe, they came in and they started out the process. All the older people were taken away to labor, so there was nobody there to really protect them. So who was left? The older people, the women, the children. So they put them in ghettos. They starved them. They put them in cattle trains and delivered them to Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek. They delivered them into different concentration camps. And it became an industry. The railroads, they got paid. Then they used the bodies, they made soap out of them, lampshades, and all kinds of things. So it became like an industry. People didn't care. Give you an idea. Where my grandfather was in a little town, Varejo. Well, it wasn't that little. It was 20,000 people. Out of 20,000 people, half of the population was Jewish. So all that property, the other half, grabbed. So nobody cared. You know, you were a neighbor, but nobody cared. Now, before that happened, you went to school together. It's mind-boggling till this day. Everything does not have an answer. We try to answer. Go ahead, keep asking questions.
I would like to know how you dealt through the years with the anger, the pain, the sadness that I'm sure you deal with, and not only how you dealt with it, you become a productive, wonderful citizen. I'm wondering if you could share.
Excellent question. If I spend my time on hating and all that, I couldn't make a living. I have 2 daughters. I want to make darn sure that they have what I didn't have. I want to make sure they go to college. I want to make sure they get married. I want to make sure they have, they have a decent life. In order to do that, if I spend time on hate, I'll never make it. So you put hate aside. Like somebody asked me a question that comes with your question. He said, if you would meet Hitler, what would you tell him? I said, I'd tell him go to hell. I can go on about my business. and I keep going about my business. But if I spend my time hating them and keep on, elite on me, I won't be able to do nothing for myself. So see, even though I went through all this, I feel like I never killed anybody, and to me that's really something big. Because after I got free, in about a few days, especially under the Soviet Union, there was a lot of killings going on. But I never did. I came close, but I really never did. And I feel very good about it. I don't think one human being should ever, ever, ever even think of killing another. Because we all are human beings. That's the difference between us and animals. So the hatred, well, you overcome it. But you never forget, what happens to you. I mean, you live with it. You dream, you live with it. But don't spend time on it.
Did you ever lose faith in God?
I sure did. They even put God on trial after the war. If somebody read, some of you read about the Holocaust, the people after the war, they put God on trial and asked him why he did it, why he needed children, to sacrifice children and elderly people and gas chambers, and all that. I don't know how it came out. But I believe there's a God. I believe there's a universal God, and I believe there's a God, but I don't know what he is. I don't think he's Jewish, and I don't think, well, you guys think he's Christian, but in other words, I believe he's universal.
Before you went to the concentration camp, was there like a period of time that you knew you were going to Germany?
Nobody believed. That's an excellent question. Nobody believed anything. There were people who escaped from certain roundups and came and warned other people. They thought that those people are lunatics. They thought people can't do that. It's impossible. Nobody believed.
Did you go to the camp the same time your family went? Did they take you a different time?
Well, I left home, I say, close to a year before they rounded up my family. I was born in 1923, and they called me in on labor. So I was leaving home when my family was gathered up. But I thought when I came home that my brother survived. When he was 6 years younger, I thought everybody was home. But he advised me otherwise.
What kind of sense of feelings did you receive from Americans when you came over to the United States?
What kind of what?
What kind of feelings did you receive from them? I mean, was it like hostility, or was it, were they happy to help you, or,
No, I just looked at Americans. I couldn't believe, people were driving cars. And I said, gee, I want one of them too. I mean, to me it was, I came into New York and my uncle picked me up from Scranton and he brought me into Philadelphia. I had my mother's sister lived in Philadelphia, and to me, I walked in, I ran in water. I mean, I never, just, then I saw, toilets inside the house. I never, to me, it was something like, I looked around, I mean, it was strange,
Were they, do you think that maybe they were like, did people from the United States feel intimidated, do you think? I mean, kind of scared to talk to you, or were they, wanting to talk to you and help
everybody
you?
came and talked because I was different.
Right.
And I was with my aunt in Philadelphia about a week. They brought me back into Scranton, and on the way into Scranton, one of her daughters, she's still alive. She is in Miami. I mean in Florida. She says, when they picked me up and brought me from Philadelphia to Scranton, I tried to ask him, you know, I saw him driving a car. I thought you need a certain type of license. But I see all these people drive, you know, it must be easy, you know. So, but I didn't have any money. They brought me into Scranton. My uncle, who vouched for me, he gave me $25, put me on the bus, and he says, New York is the best place to get yourself greened out. I didn't know what he meant. Well, I learned what he meant. I'm green, this grass, I didn't know, you know, how to behave and all. So you go there, and I meet my own, you know, people who survive. And I stayed in New York about 3 months. I couldn't hold a job there. I wound up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I saved about $35 or $40. I went to the Penn Station those days. I went over there. My accent was heavy. So the guy there on the Penn Station, I said, what can I do for you? I didn't know what he said anyhow. I said, listen, here is some money. And I took out all my money, the $40, put it there in front of him. I said, give me a ticket as far west as the money you'll take me. He says, well, I'll give you a ticket for, you need at least $5 to eat or something. So he took $35, he gave me a ticket to Minneapolis, Minnesota. But before he did, he said, say it again. He liked my accent the way I said west. See, because there's no W in the European language. So, you know, I guess I am frequency giving a ticket, and I wound up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But that's history.
I have a question. When y'all had to wear the yellow stars of David, like on your shirts and everything, was there already an establishment that you were Jews and that before you wore them?
The way, that's a very, very good question. They came into town. The first thing they did, they rounded up the Jewish elders, the rabbis, they made what they call a Yudin Rat. They called in the elders, the synagogues. And those people, they got lists from them. They gave them orders. Then they established what they call a Jewish police force. And they gave orders out that every Jew should wear a star of David. If you wore a star of David on the front, then they said they wanted one on the front and one on the back. And there was a lot of yellow cloth. So, because everybody has to wear a star of David. Now, if you were in labor camps, you wore yellow band. If you were you had a Jewish ancestor, way back, you wore a white band. But some of them say, gee, I'm not Jewish, I don't even know what Jewish is, And, if they could establish, they were not. But they went to the 4th generation. So they were white men. But they were still among the Jews. They were found as a Jew.
So when they asked you to wear them, you didn't really know the consequences of them at that time? Like, to distinguish
Even if
yourself?
you knew, it was too late.
So why couldn't you just take them off?
If you take them off and they caught you, they killed you immediately.
Okay, so...
Another thing too, when the rations came on, they started rationing bread. They started rationing food. Food is a survival. Now the Jewish ration cards were different than the non-Jewish cards. Right there, you have to wear. Another thing too, the Jews were under curfew. You see, when they came into a town, they called it the Einsatzgruppe, the black hats. They called them, the killers, the assassins. And they established themselves. You didn't play around with them. They were uprising. They were Jewish fellows who killed an assassin once in a while. So they took out and they killed 10 Jews for a while. And after a while, quiet. And once you get hungry, you're easy prey.
in this camp that you had to go to, was there some people that committed suicide from all the hard living, decrease of food?
I don't know any, not in my camp. They want to survive. No. And they didn't escape either.
Recently, in the last couple of years, there's been a couple of books in Germany that have caused a big ruckus that said, in the past we thought that perhaps the everyday German did not realize what was going on in the camp, and then a book came out in the last couple of years that said that maybe the everyday German did know. What's your opinion?
The everyday German knew.
Yes,
You
not
have to
went
know.
the army.
Alex, I'll tell you why. Although in Germany, the Jews were a low percentage, but they have to know. Because the neighbors moved into their property, into their homes. They knew it. But naturally, listen, if you were living there, would you say you knew it? I mean, you know.
Do you think they knew that the Jewish neighbors were being put to death?
Sure they did. Sure they did. Well, you see, they took homosexuals, the gypsies, but the Jews were more intense than the Jew. The gypsy was about the next in line for extermination, but the gypsy had a way out. If the man volunteered in the army, they let his family be. They left him alone. The Jew, they didn't give him a choice. Okay. All the Germans know, all the Poles know, all the Hungarians know, all the people so-called in the community knew, but a few of them did hide some Jews. But if you got caught hiding a Jew, you know, they put you to death. They hung you in the square and put a sign out there. This is what you get for hiding Jews. But they did hide Jews. You know, that's what they call righteous Gentiles. They got them in Jerusalem in the Yad Hashem. You know, where they just like Schindler's List. Well, the guy started out as a business, and after a while, he figured it's better business being good than being bad. He saved, a few Jews. Maybe he did it for insurance policies, but he did.
As for the guards and the Germans that you say knew about the Jews being killed, and obviously the guards did kill you, do you feel forgiveness, or do you still regret it?
I don't forgive anybody. I don't have any right to forgive or not to forgive. I don't forgive, and I don't go around blaming the new generation for it either. In other words, the youngsters, I mean, you can't, you don't go around blaming them for the sins of their fathers. But to forgive who? Like an Eichmann or Dr. Mengele? No, why should I forgive him? I don't think he needs my forgiveness anyway. I don't think he even thinks about it.
I was just wondering, did you ever consider denying the fact that you were a Jew, or so you wouldn't be forced to wear a star, or did they already know who was Jew and who wasn't?
If I would deny it, it wouldn't have done me any good. They find out. They had records. When they came into the town, they found the records. I will just tell you, my grandfather lived in a town that had 20,000 people, of which half of them were Jews. You had 7 synagogues in town. You had only 2 churches. And we lived side by side. We went to school with them. We lived with them. We dealt with business, everything, together. So the only difference was the Jews celebrated Saturday and the Christians Sunday. That's it. But otherwise, they were in the markets together.
Well, what about trying to escape? Did you ever think of fleeing before? Because, although you knew it was dangerous, you knew what might happen.
A lot of them escaped. They went to Palestine, and a lot of them came to the United States. don't forget, the whole world, if you read about the Holocaust, the whole world is really guilty, not just the Germans. Because even the United States closed the borders. There were Jews came into Cuba. They came to the United States and they were sent back. That was good for Hitler. Hitler said, you see, nobody wants them. So, I mean, you know, there was it wasn't as simple, but that was a good question.
Do you think the chances of you being a survivor would be the same if you had escaped or if you attempted to escape?
The what?
The chances of you being a survivor, do you think it would have been the same if you tried to escape, or do you think you were better off the way you were?
If I would have tried to escape and got killed, I would have been dead. If I would have...
Remembering your family.
You always remember. A thing like that you never forget. There is no night that you don't dream about. There is no day that goes by that you don't think about. When you see a child, you see, people say, oh, I know what it is. Nobody knows. You have to really experience it to see it, to know it. The American Army came in, and my brother says he was liberated from Ginsburg, Anyhow, till this day, my brother is 6 years younger than me. That means he'll be 68 in October. He doesn't want to talk about it. He would not go in front of give speeches. He says to me, what makes you do it? Well, for the past half a dozen years, I says, wait a minute. Another 10 years, I'll be gone. All of us getting older, we're going to go. There's a lot of people, a lot of revisionists say the Holocaust never happened. And I hope that they do not succeed.
How did you survive after you found out that all of your family had died, and then after your brother was on his deathbed? How did you live with that knowing?
I knew, that they were dead, and I knew, the Holocaust happened, and I was alive, and I took off from home, came into to Italy. Well, it's a long story there. That's another hour, speaking. But I came into Italy, and we stayed in Italy about 3 years, and we had a choice to go to Palestine and fight, We didn't want to go anymore because only two of us survived. I knew that my mother had a brother in the United States, and she had a sister. I knew the sister was Spiegel, and I knew that, her husband's name was Emma, but I didn't know where or what. But I heard talk, my mother used to say, she had an older brother who was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. But all I knew is Scranton, Pa. I didn't know Pa meant Pennsylvania. I didn't know Scranton. I said Scranton, because and I was in DP camp. So I had a friend of mine from Ungvar that was the capital of the Carpathians. And he married a lady from Poland, a survivor, and she was what we called intelligentsia. She was a learned lady. She worked for the Red Cross. He says, if you go down to the administration building and tell her your story, she might find your uncle. So I went down there. I says, well, my uncle's name, I told her in Jewish. I says, well, maybe. So she went through all the things. She says, well, maybe they call him Irving. I said, okay. Well, I knew Roth. My mother's name was Roth. She was a Roth girl. So Irving Roth. So we established the name. Scranton, she scrambled it out to Scranton, Pennsylvania. So she found my uncle. It took about close to a few months. And he sent us a letter. Yeah, he's looking for family, that died. And he sent us a letter, and the letter was $25. I guess that $25 was the loan. I was upset a little bit about the money that he sent because the money in the normal things, the exchange was 200 lira for $1. And if I would have got the money in cash, I could have sold it for 630 lira, so 3 times. So I was tossing with the idea to send it back, but I figured if I do that, I'll make him mad. And I wanted him to become friendly, he's my uncle, to send me papers. Finally, I persuaded him to send us papers. So he sent us affidavits, but he couldn't co-sign it himself. So he found a cousin of my mother's who was in the lamb's cookie business. And they co-signed the papers, and that's how we came to the United States. He already brought out his brother's wife and 2 daughters survived, and they were in Sweden. He brought them out, so we met here in New York.
Have you ever gone through droughts of like deep depression from your
I guess I did, but I never knew. I just, I'm sure I did, but I never knew.
Of all the Germans that you worked with or knew before you were taken to the labor camp, did you ever encounter one that was willing to help the Jews, or were they all just like indifferent to the whole situation?
I never encountered Germans till I came to this country.
Or just like in your town, the Christians that
Well,
there were like
in
7
the town, now I'll give you an idea. The town that we were, there was a town near Munkach where my father was. Munkach had Munkach. Now, that was, the reason I say it was called Munkach, Munkachevo, because the Carpathian Mountains where I come from, where I was born at Czech. A Czech Jew. Then it became Hungarian. Now if I want to go back home, it would be Ukrainian. So you had all kinds of nationalities. Now in the 40,000 mix, you had Jews, you had Austrians, you had Hungarians, you had a lot of mix. That's why you have the problem today. Each one of them wanted to kill God. Like the newspaper interviewed me about the Yugoslavian, the fighting in Yugoslavia. So I didn't want to be, I said, they said, why is it? Well, I said, it's very simple. They ran out of Jews, now they're killing each other. So the guy looked at me and he says, do you mean that? I said, well, tell me what it is. You have the Serbs, Russian Orthodox. You have the Muslims, and you have the third parties there who are Roman Catholics. So they each trying to, mine is better than yours, so they're killing each other. There'll never be peace there. Unless we go there and tell them, hey, listen, we can get along.
I was wondering that when you were in the camp, if you ever had any personal experiences with the guards, or whether they were completely indifferent to you, or what the atmosphere was like with them.
I made myself inconspicuous. In other words, I made sure every morning I'm never the first, and I was too tall to be the last. So somehow in the middle. I never volunteered for anything. Now some people say they volunteered because they figure, that to work in the mess hall, they get an extra potato or something. I never did. I always tried to be inconspicuous. That's how I survived. At least that's what I think.
You want to leave a message to everyone, what they should remember about this.
I think the father of my wife. My message to you is, folks, you live in a country where you are free. The day you hit to be be 18 years old, go and vote. Don't believe politicians. Don't believe anybody. Read, make up your own minds. Be your own person. Be your own people. You live in the greatest country on the face of the earth. Keep it free. Do not let this country, don't let anybody take over. Don't let anybody dictate to you. The greatest thing in the world is when you get up in the morning, and if you have $2, you can get in the car or get somewhere, and you keep moving. And nobody has a right to stop you and ask you for a passport. You can go from here all the way to 49 states, all over, and you're free. The greatest thing in the world is freedom. And thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.